If you've ever been watching a program on astronomy on television, say the solar system or something, very quickly they start throwing around numbers that are, well, astronomical. Perhaps you're instead watching a program on the national debt, and then they start talking about stacking dollar bills from here to the moon or something, as if that's going to help. But what all of these shows seem to have in common is this unfortunate tendency of taking the viewer aside and saying in so many words, you can't really understand these big numbers. In other words, they treat you like a complete idiot, when in reality, we're all just merely incomplete idiots. So the question is, why do they do that, given that the whole concept of number is to prevent us from having to be content with saying merely, quote, a whole lot, end quote. No, it'd be nice to be able to understand some of these numbers. It even gets sillier when people start bringing in religion into the mix, as if the fact that there are a bajillion molecules in a drop of water proves there's a God, or from the other team proves that there's no need for a God. It's all, frankly, quite silly in my opinion. So let's try to understand what some of these basic numbers are, at least the first several orders of magnitude. And here we'll see that we're helped very much by the fact that we don't simply live in one or even two dimensions, but we live in three dimensions. Let's take advantage of that. So if you want to think about, first of all, a million, imagine taking a meter, about yay wide, and making a square. You could sit it on your lap. And then if you were to score it into 1,000 strips vertically and 1,000 strips horizontally, you'd be left with 1,000 by 1,000 for a total of 1 million individual square millimeters. Nothing mysterious about it. It's right here on your lap. Indeed, the very picture you're looking at right here on your monitor consists of individual pixels, picture elements, is what pixel means. You got roughly the same order of magnitude there. If you got a pretty good monitor, it may be several million, but that's the ballpark. Let's go on to a billion, though. Let's go with the square thing again, but let's do the three-dimensional square called a cube. And if you had a cube a meter on each side, you could cut it into 1,000 slabs this way, 1,000 slabs this way, and then layer cake it 1,000 this way, and it would fall into 1,000 times 1,000 times 1,000, or 1 billion individual little tiny cubes, each of which is a cubic millimeter. Now I don't know anything off the top of my head that's exactly a cubic millimeter, but if you think about what table salt is, the best I can come up with is that table salt tends to be typically about 1/3 of a millimeter on a side. Maybe sometimes less or more, but about 1/3 of a millimeter. So if we were to shrink our cube by a factor of 3 in each dimension, we'd have a little cube, 1/3 of a meter, 1/3 of a meter on each side, so 15 inches tall. That would have about 1 billion grains of salt if it were packed tightly. If you wanted to let it kind of fall out into a nice conical shape, about 45-degree angle on the slope, interestingly enough, the geometry of such things is it's still right at about the same height that it was, and now the diameter's twice what it was. So that's still roughly what 1 billion grains of salt look like. In other words, you could put it on a big serving platter, walk around. Next party you have, hey, here's 1 billion grains of table salt. Isn't that cool? Okay, you go to different parties than I do. But if you wanted to shrink it down by a factor of 10 in each dimension, on your hand, about this high, that much table salt is roughly 1 million grains of salt, right there in the palm of your hand. Hold infinity in the palm of your hand. Eternity in an hour or something like that, right? So that's what a million and a billion is. What about a trillion? Well, before we talk about a trillion, it's important to note that in American usage, a billion simply means 1,000 million, and a trillion means 1,000 billion. Well, in British usage, it's different. What they mean by a billion is a million million. What we call a billion, they are content to call 1,000 million. So before you sign a big check when you go to the UK as an American, make sure you know what you're talking about. You do not want to have to explain that to your spouse. Believe me. So what's a trillion then? Well, if our billion grains of salt was sitting here on this little serving platter, then we could scale that up by a factor of 10 in each dimension. And so it would be about 3.5 or so meters high. So it would be close to the top of a basketball backboard, and slope down and be about twice that diameter. So you could probably bury a small car with it, but not a big tractor or something. So that should give you some idea of what a trillion is, what a billion is, what a million is, and should demystify some of these sorts of things. So it shouldn't be a matter of she blinded me with science anymore on these numbers now. or in my case, she blinded me with accounting. I mean, whatever works for you there, I guess. But hopefully that's helpful. And if you want to think about a quadrillion, I'll let you take it from there. I think you got the idea from here on out. So that's all I have to say on the matter, and talk to you later.